back to talk a little bit more metaphysics with you guys. Okay, so in discussing determinism and libertarianism, their strengths and their weaknesses, how do we bring this together? How do we look at freedom? One such view, okay, is a middle ground between libertarianism and determinism that is called compatibilism. Compatibilism is referred to as such because it is a view of freedom that is compatible with determinism. Now, according to compatibilism, while our choices are determined by such things as influences such as circumstances and character, desires, etc., we are free to choose within our own respective desires. Freedom, in other words, is a matter of not being physically or psychologically forced or compelled to do what one does. Your character, personality, preferences, and general motivational set may be entirely determined by events for which you are in no way responsible, by genetic inheritance, upbringing, subsequent experience, and so on. But you do not have to be in control of any of these things in order to have compatibilist freedom. So they do not constrain or compel you, because compatibilist freedom is just a matter of being able to choose and act in a way that one prefers or thinks best. Okay, sometimes this is called self-determinism. Okay? In other words, the will always acts according to its desires if it is to be considered free. Thus, while there is a sense of determinism, it is not the case that we are mindless robots. Okay? Or that we act in such a way that we are forced or coerced to do anything that we do not desire to do. Very clearly, that puts Calvinists outside of the realm of Fatalist, just to refute Mr. Tassi. But here comes the objection. Okay, what if there's a person who points a gun to your head and asks you to give you your wallet, or he's going to take your life? Okay, does this type of situation take away freedom? According to this view, to compatibilism, not necessarily. For even if a gun is pointed to our head, that merely functions to bring out a strong desire within every human being, which is the will or the desire to live. Thus, has the gun an external influence taken away the ability to choose? No. On the other hand, it has brought out strong desires that cause us to choose. For we would choose to give him the wallet out of desire to save our life. We could choose to refuse the gunman, and then he would take our life and our money anyway, or we could choose not to act at all, or to freeze, if you will. Okay, but all these things are still choices. Which one wins out is determined according to our strongest desires at the moment of choice. Now, if this model of human freedom is correct, then the essential question is not really one of freedom when it comes to choosing, but really one of desire. And the question gets driven further when we must consider the nature of the one who is desiring. For instance, consider Jesus Christ. Okay, being that he was God in the flesh and completely free from the corruption and the stain of sin, indeed he was righteous to the very core of his being. Could Jesus Christ choose to sin? It would hardly seem viable that a person who was so pure in nature and which showed in his thoughts, his words, and his deeds could choose to sin. But what about the sinner? If a sinner is one who is corrupted by sin, he's guilty of sin, and he loves sin according to John 3:19. He desires to sin, and he has a heart that is at enmity toward God according to Romans 8:7 and 8. Then when it comes time to choose, to live righteously or to live sinfully, to do good or to do evil, what will the sinner choose? According to compatibilism, if he or she is determined to choose sin according to his or her nature. But we must note that he or she chose sin of their own will and based on their own desires, corrupted as they are. They were never forced to choose sin. Therefore, the sinner is responsible for his own sin. No one forces them to sin, even though they sin of necessity, again, according to their own nature, according to their own desires. In other words, they are free to be what they are by nature, sinners. There is no coercion or a divine gun to one's head taking away the will of the creature. Okay, people aren't damned against their will. Okay, people don't go to heaven against their will either. They're willing to go to either one. Thus, while God is the primary cause in that he has determined all things according to his decree, He has ordained it in such a way as to use sinful desires of the creatures, thus giving way to secondary causes. This is what the Westminster Confession means when it says that God does not repress the will of the creatures, or that he takes away freedom or contingency of secondary causes. Rather, the will of created beings and the freedom and contingency of secondary causes are established by him. God does not make decisions through us. God has ordained and decreed that our desires cause our wills to make authentic choices. Thus, his primary will, which causes all things, decreed that the will of the creatures be used, though ultimately superintended by God. The use of the will of the creatures is the establishment of secondary causes. So, in summation, compatibilism would certainly be in agreement with the sovereign decrees of God in determining all things, while also holding the creatures free and still responsible for their own sins. Now, responsibility here is not based on ability. Rather, responsibility is based on obligation to God and his commandments. So, in other words, human responsibility is a consequence of God's authority. We are to base were we to base responsibility on ability here, then no one would at all be responsible for their sins, because sinners can only sin. So they would not be accountable for something they didn't possess the ability to do. But if a sinner is obligated to God, not because of his ability to commit or not commit sins, it should become clear that sinners, in a sense, are responsible for what they are, sinners. Thus, in the compatibilistic model of freedom, the dilemma of divine sovereignty and human freedom, I believe, is neutralized, and God remains sovereign, he remains God, and humans remain, they remain creatures, fully responsible to God based on who God is and what he has commanded us to do, all the while being able, again, to act out who and what we desire, who we are and what we desire to do. There is never any coercion, and there is clearly no type of fatalism at all. So again, the charge of Mr. Tassi that Calvinism is fatalism is just completely refuted, and an entirely false conclusion based on his teachings. Thanks.